Hello, this is Jean Chandler. I'm your friendly HEMA historian, historical fencing practitioner for about 20 years, and independent researcher with a particular interest in Central and Northern Europe. And today I want to tell you a little bit about a very interesting character called Olaus Magnus, who was a cleric from Sweden in the early 16th century, and especially and in particular, I want to just look at and talk about a little bit some literary works that he produced. And the first one is this beautiful map that we're looking at right now. This is called the Carta Marina, and it also has a much longer Latin name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, um, which was one of the most important maps of this region of Scandinavia. And the other is a book, kind of an atlas called The History of the Northern People or Description of the Northern Peoples, which is basically a complement to this map. They go together very closely. In fact, they share some of the same woodcuts. The little atlas is heavily illustrated with woodcuts, and some of them I think are actually literally the same ones from this thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about, briefly, about this guy and his life, and then we're going to jump into examining this map, and then we're going to move on to the book. And the reason that both the map and the book are so interesting is that the author was an educated person. He was a member of the clergy who had been to university, probably. We don't have that much biographical information about him, but it's from the Latin that he used. It appears that he did. And certainly he was an erudite individual. He was very well educated by the standards of the day, meaning that if you were a person today who was very familiar with the classics, with Greek and Roman sources, with Aristotle and Plato and Cicero and Julius Caesar and Tacitus and all that, Herodotus, etc., you would have common ground with this person. And he was educated from the point of view of understanding the classics and understanding the uh, developments of natural philosophy, which is kind of scientific precursor of the society in his day, and that is closer. This is during the early modern period, which we call that because people like this guy Olaus Magnus were much more sophisticated than we would tend to assume, and they had a lot more in common with sort of the best and brightest of our era than again most people would tend to believe based on our sort of pop culture shorthand about history. So he's sort of like, in a way, he's almost like one of us. He's like equivalent to somebody, let's say, certainly from, in a lot of ways, from somebody that would be educated from the 19th century in a lot of ways. Okay, and those kind of people like Darwin or somebody like that we look at as kind of peers. And yet he's from a place that was very mysterious and still very much steeped in folklore and superstition and magic, and it was a place that was very hard to live in. Imagine, as difficult as it is to live through a harsh winter today. Imagine before there's anything like electricity or fuel other than wood and charcoal. Modern architecture, travel. I mean, think about traveling someplace when it's 10 below, and there's no cars, there's no trains. This is a very mysterious and challenging part of the world to live in. And in this map, and in the kind of companion book that comes after it, he gets into a lot of interesting technical details about life, that how these people did survive. And he also mixes in a lot of the folklore and legends and magic from this period that he himself may not have directly believed in, but like a surprising number of educated clergy from this period, he was kind of fond of all this stuff, or it seems to have been, because he certainly gets into it a lot, and not necessarily in the sense of condemning it. And this is another thing that worth understanding, is that in this period, a lot of the clergy were trying to be Christian in the way that people became Christian in the 19th, 20th century, very strictly so, but they really weren't there yet, and they were much more wrapped up in the thinking and the mindset of the classical world and of their own you know, indigenous origins, and so they were kind of juggling between and trying to synthesize the ideas of Christianity with the ideas of the world they come from. So we're going to see all that in here. We're going to see a bunch of legends, and we're also going to see technical details about life, about procuring food and surviving and trading and warfare from this period. So let's just jump into it. The guy's real name was Olaus Magnus, and that was Latinized into Olaus Magnus because he ended up spending most of his life on the continent and a lot of it down in the vicinity of Rome and Italy. So he to communicate with the people down there, he was speaking in Latin. Everything was in Latin, and that's true of the educated strata in late medieval and early modern Europe, at least in the Catholic world, especially. And that's the international language. So when he gets down there to Italy, he's not going to expect anybody to speak Swedish, and if he does, he's a fool because there's not going to be a lot of people in Rome that speak Swedish. But Latin is a language that he can go. He lived in a lot of parts of Europe. He can go to the Low Countries, in what's today Belgium. He can go to Poland and all these other places and just speak Latin to the other educated people, and they'll understand him. So his older brother was the last real Catholic Archbishop of Sweden. And his name was Johannes Magnus, or probably Johannes Månsson originally. We think that both of them attended the university at Uppsala, which is basically the only real university that was in Sweden at that time, and it's a very interesting place because it's also Uppsala was also the center of pre-Christian religious cults. It's one of the very few places that we know where there are some indications of a cult of Odin. They used to have sacred trees up there, which they allegedly, according to some people, some of their outsiders and the Christians that came later, that they were saying that they would ritually sacrifice people by hanging them in these giant oak trees. So kind of a spooky place. Olaus Magnus, having been educated and was becoming kind of like the right hand of his brother, who was the Catholic Archbishop, was helping his brother deal with a crisis that was mounting because Sweden was converting to Lutheranism. So they ended up both getting kicked out of Sweden. Sweden ditched Catholicism and went over to the Protestant side. And Olaf spent a lot of his life as a diplomat, which was very common for educated people. Again, if you're very well versed in Latin and you know the classics and you've been educated to know a little bit about the world, you can be a very useful diplomat. And a lot of these people would do that. They would traveling around and they would talking to people in different parts of the world and negotiating treaties and so on. In fact, even after Olaus was banned from Sweden by the new Lutheran king, it seems that he may have negotiated a treaty for Sweden with the Netherlands, like a trade treaty with Holland. Although the ban was never lifted, so it's a little bit unclear to me. As far as I could tell, it seems that he did negotiate this. He was then given a lot of appointments by the church. For a while, he had a post in Liège in Flanders, which is now Belgium, and he was also in Poland for a while. But he ended up back in Italy, spent some time in Venice, Rome, and several other Italian towns, and then finally he was made the Archbishop without portfolio, you could say, of Sweden, which was just a name only, and then ended up dying at the age of 67 at a little monastery of St. Brigitta in Rome. And St. Brigitta is a Swedish saint, so there may have been some other Swedish expats there. It was probably like a familiar place for him. So this map that we're looking at, which is called the Carta Marina and also has a Latin name with about 2 sentences long that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I just don't have the Latin chops yet. He spent 12 years while he was in Italy producing this. In the research, it looks a little cartoonish when we're looking at this, but the research that went into this is quite serious. And looking at it, you can tell that you can recognize the Scandinavian peninsula here and the northern coast of Europe as well, and it's fairly accurately rendered, which is no mean feat. This is a tricky thing to figure out, and this is in a period where Latinized Europe was obsessed with maps. This is one of the elements of map making that kind of advanced the cause. Mercator was just around the corner. This map was printed via woodblock printing, I believe, in Venice in 1539. It is the third map that was ever created of Scandinavia that we know of. There was another one that was pretty good by a guy called Jacob Ziegler, German guy, but this is the first one that actually had all the place names and the details, and it has a lot of details. A lot of details. It's got all the little communities in Scandinavia and in the important surrounding districts that mattered, as well as just tons of little Easter eggs that's what we're gonna kind of focus on. Um, it is considered surprisingly accurate in spite of all the sea monsters and everything in here. But there's depictions of currents and the outlines of islands and things, especially in the Scandinavian part, um, which which are well regarded by oceanographers. Like considered like it's an impressive research effort, so to speak. It's a big physically a big map that it's 1.7 meters wide by 1.25 meters tall, so 5.5 feet by 4.1 feet for us Americans. Um, it it provided some soft power for Sweden. A lot of these educated people that were coming to the centers of Europe, places like Rome and Cologne and Paris, wanted to represent their homeland, so that to literally put them on the map. Because for most people at this time, Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, especially, maybe not quite as much with Denmark, but Sweden, Norway, Finland, these were very remote places that were almost legendary. People knew that this was the place where the Goths had come from and the Vikings, but they didn't know a lot about it. So this is a way of showing what's interesting about his homeland and sort of helping to generate some soft power for his people in the Latin world. The next interesting thing about this is that this map disappeared in 1574, or at least that's the last mention that we have of it, and it was sort of lost to history, and so people were looking for it and couldn't find it. A copy was discovered in Munich in 1886, and I believe that's what we're looking at here. It's mostly from that copy, and then there was a second copy, which I think was monochrome, like black and white, that was found in Switzerland in 1961, and what we have here is pieced together from different blocks, and I'm not even sure if it's all from the same copy of the map. You can see some differences in color and so on, but this is a pretty close look at what this map would have looked like if you had bought a copy, and it did sell pretty well. It was for a little while, it was a popular thing. Life in Europe was changing very fast at this time, and the technology of map making was increasing very quickly, and the sort of emphasis on what people found interesting, the interest in some of the folklore stuff was declining, and that may be partly why this thing kind of had its moment and then seems to have disappeared. The translation of the Latin description of this reads, "A marine map and description of the northern lands and their marvels, most carefully drawn up in Venice in the year 1539 through the generous assistance of the most honorable Lord and Patriarch Hieronymo Quirino." And then there's also an Italian description, which is, the translation's pretty rough, but it says, "A little book that closely explains a map of Nordic cold beyond the Germanic Sea in the country which it presents its extremely peculiar, priorly unknown traits, unknown to either the Greeks or Latins, and wonders of nature." So this is important because in the Latin world, everybody thought that Aristotle was sort of the be all end all, and the knowledge of the Romans and the Greeks was the high mark. That was the high watermark. So anything that was a little bit beyond their ken, so to speak, was super interesting and kind of challenging to the old order. This was very much the case when they discovered the New World. There was a big controversy, and Aristotle declined in importance quite a bit because Aristotle didn't know anything about the New World. And Aristotle and the various scholars of the classical world really didn't know a whole lot about Scandinavia either. So, okay, let's jump into the map. So as I said before, the key parts of the map, which is sort of the center and the right-hand part, that actually portray the northern coastline of continental Europe and the Scandinavian peninsula and Finland and so on, are pretty accurate in their outline if you look at it. Now, the map does look a little bit cartoonish, and it's meant to be amusing, and it's meant to convey a lot of sort of hidden details. It's full of Easter eggs. On the left side, we can see on the bottom left that is England and Scotland, which is not very well portrayed, and I think that it seems like a lot of it's blocked off by the text, which explains a lot about what's going on the map. I suspect that Olaus did not have a good survey for these areas. And so the British Isles are too far south on this map. They should be further up, almost across from Norway. And then he's got the various island chains. I'm going to zoom in now. We can kind of zoom in and see a little bit more detail. So here on the left, these are the Hebrides. And then just to the right of there, those are the Orkneys, or Orcades, as you call them then. Excuse me. And these islands are very much outsized. The islands are not that big, and they're they're overrepresented on the map and I think that's because they were very important for the Scandinavian people. These places were settled by Scandinavians, by Norwegians, basically, and they were still trading with the Scandinavian mainland, and they were, even though they had, for example, in the Hebrides, they were speaking Gaelic for a long time, but they still had strong connections, trade connections, and so on with Scandinavian world. So that's why they're portrayed as they are. Here's the Faroes. All the sea monsters, of course, are concentrated very much in this, out into the North Atlantic, in the unknown part of the map, and that's sort of a common trait with a notorious trait of medieval maps. However, a few of these things have been kind of decoded, and we know what they're supposed to be. A lot of them would refer to specific legends, so they're there to kind of amuse you with stories. Some of them are tied to real things, although not very well represented. So, for example, here on the left, this is a narwhal, and it's not what a narwhal really looks like, but you can see the horn. And then we got a flying fish just to the right of that. These are real things. And in fact, in Sweden, they knew what a narwhal was. In Norway, they knew what a narwhal was, but they sold the horns they're actually the teeth of narwhals. These were sold to the Latin people down in Germany and, going all the way down to Italy and so on as unicorn horns. So they could get a lot more money for them, which to me is pretty funny. The other thing is we can see a lot of ships, some of which, they all seem to be in some kind of trouble, or most of them. And he helpfully gives us the origin of the ship written just below them. So here there's a sea monster. I'm not sure what it represents, but there's a little Norwegian ship right here that looks like it's about to be in trouble. And then going up a little closer, this is Iceland, Islandia. And we can see here's a Lubeck ship that is being accosted by some giant sea monsters, which I really like the look of. Maybe these are supposed to be whales. And they are tossing overboard a bunch of barrels. Now, these barrels are sort of the shipping containers of the medieval world and early modern world, too. So these could be gunpowder or pickles or beer or cloves, or most likely, given where they are, the most likely thing would be sulfur, because that's one of the things they were getting a lot of from Iceland. And then just over here to the left, we can see that there's a battle going on. When the ship on the left says it's Hamburger, that's not reference to McDonald's. That is means it's a ship from Hamburg, which is one of the most powerful Hanseatic cities, which is like a mostly German, Northern European trade cartel. And then next to it, getting blown up and wrecked, it says Scot. That means that's a Scottish ship, and it was probably a pirate ship that was accosting the Hanseatic vessel. There was a lot of Scottish pirates that were still active all around the North Sea. English pirates and German pirates and Norwegian pirates too were also fairly common. And then I may have forgotten. I don't know if I mentioned that this one being attacked by the two whales is a Lubeck. It says Lubeckienses, so that's a Lubeck ship. Just above that, we see a Bremen ship, and it's probably picking up some sulfur in these barrels here. That throughout the map, we'll see along the coastlines and along the lakes and rivers representations of the trade goods. So you can see that there's a bunch of fish sort of stacked up right here. That's showing us that that this is a trade artifact that they're selling. We also see the three major volcanoes of Iceland right here, which is interesting. Uh, One of them says chaos. And there wasn't a lot of big settlements in Iceland in this era. The piracy, I should mention also that the pirates included pirates from all the way down in North Africa, the Barbary Corsairs, who were really surging in the 16th century and would actually raid all the way up to Iceland sometime, although I think that happened a bit later. As we go a little further up, we can see on the right-hand side of this part of the image, pack ice. We can see some bears cavorting on the pack ice. Pack ice is something that was not very well understood down in the southern parts of, the Mediterranean areas of Europe. So this would have been interesting for the Italians. They didn't see a lot of pack ice or understand its various traits. And we can see a little further up here. This is like folklore, but it probably representing something very real, which is wind. You see this face coming out of the cloud blowing down, and there's a guy in armor on a horse fleeing the wind. And this is one of the woodcuts that is in the description of the Northern Peoples, the pamphlet that we're going to talk about after this. And we'll get more into it there. But basically, this guy's trying to outrun a dangerous cold wind. So this is sort of a Jack London kind of situation. We also see the coats of arms in all these different places that represents whatever family was supposed to be in charge. This is probably showing Denmark, and I don't know if there was like considered to be a local power in Iceland that was independent, or maybe it's Norway. I don't know. I don't remember who owned Denmark or Iceland at that point, but we'll see those all throughout this this map. And then on the upper left, this is supposed to be Greenland, and for some reason there's legend that I don't really know much about the origin of what the legend is, but there's legends about dwarves living in Greenland. So we see a normal-sized guy and a smaller guy fighting with spears, and this is another one of the woodcuts that we'll see again in the pamphlet with a little more detail on what's going on there. And we also see various animals, the game animals, the potential predators, and so forth. There was not a lot of game in Iceland, birds and seals, I guess, and they're depicting bears. I don't know if there still was any left at that point. There probably was coming down from the north, polar bears and such. So going down a little bit over here to the right, we're gonna stay zoomed in. We see some more sea monsters, and you can follow up as to what these are supposed to be, and a lot of these things have legends associated with them. And I'm not sure if this is still supposed to be Greenland, or if this is what this land area is up here. But they're showing a lot of debris in the water, a bunch of logs and so on, and it's obviously a navigation hazard. We also see like a type of warboat that we see very similar ones to these in the Swiss Chronicles, shown fighting in the Swiss lakes. I don't know if that's a warboat or if it's just like covered to protect from the weather or something like that. But and here we see what appears to be a galley, like a rowing galley. So this could be sort of like a remnant down here by on the Norwegian coast, a remnant of the old Viking type rowed ships, or it could be an Italian galley. I know the Italians actually did make it all the way up to Flanders with some of their galleys, but I'm not sure if they got this far. Wonderful depiction of a sea serpent devouring a ship from Gothia, so that would probably be maybe from Visby in Gotland or down in somewhere in southern Sweden. This is a whirlpool. This is a real thing. So on the coast of Norway, there's a couple of permanent or very frequent whirlpools that are very famous, and these are covered again in the pamphlet. We'll talk about a little more about that later. This is this interesting fellow right here. As best I can figure out, this is meant to be sort of a household spirit or kind of a troll or demon that could be compelled to work. So this guy's actually sweeping out a stable. I thought this was a giant at first because this is actually, if you ever saw Troll Hunter, the Norwegian film, this is right around the area of Jotunheim where the giants are supposed to be. But as far as I can tell, that was actually supposed to be a domestic troll who can be compelled to do chores for you. And this guy is also in the pamphlet. We'll look at it later. Here we see a bunch of trade goods. this is fish. Obviously, it's halibut and herring and other, maybe those are cod too. Um, we can see big statues that we'll see a little bit more about in the pamphlet. Here's another sea monster that looks ridiculous, but is apparently a real thing. So it says Vaca Marina, which means cow of the sea. And that is a reference to the mammals that are in the same family as manatees, of which there are a variety of different regional species. And these things did exist along this coastline. We can see a guy here that's using a plumb line to measure the depth of the water. There are apparently representations of some of the currents. I don't really know how to decipher that. Here's a ship from Holland. Here's a person that's trying to swim for some reason off the coast of southern Norway and is being devoured by a bunch of fish. I don't know what the story is for that. Here's Denmark as we get further down. Now, Denmark was a little better understood in continental Europe because they kind of face south. And we can look here a little bit at the coastline. So starting on the left, first off, I want to point out this ship because I did an article. I think this is the famous Peter von Danzig, which was a warship that was of the Hanseatic League. It could be the one of the later warships that they had, which were also very famous. But you can see this is a very heavily armed ship. It's just crammed with cannons. The Peter von Danzig was a ship that was used by the city of Danzig as part of the Anglo-Hanseatic War to defeat the British in a war in the 1470s. And I wrote an article about that for Medieval Warfare magazine. I'll post a link on the bottom. Incidentally, there will be links to this map where you can look at it yourself, as well as translation of the pamphlet and all that stuff will be down in the comments. Along the coast, we can see the various towns that were of some importance and some other details that are significant. So right off the coast of Holland, we can see there's some, I don't know if these are islands or rocks, maybe that threaten navigation. This is Amsterdam right down here. This area is called Frisia, which was a kind of a low-lying, swampy area where there were some very independent-minded peasants, pretty much all the way from here over to the base of Jutland in Denmark, where these people actually had a peasant republic for several centuries, and the Danes kept trying to conquer them, as did various German princes. And it took. They finally did, but it took until around this period. And we can see that there's a Frisian horse. This is a call out just for my friend Jack Gassman, because those Frisians are pretty neat horses. They have a lot of spirit, strong, energetic, spirited animals. And we can see a beacon here. This is something that you'll see all along the southern part of the coast, which are sort of crude lighthouses. They would have a tower where they would keep a beacon lit. And then right down here this is Hamburg on the Elbe River, very important Hanseatic city. And then there's a little canal connecting it to Lübeck. And then again along the coast. These cities were very tough, and they were often getting into disputes with the Kingdom of Denmark, and they more often than not came out on top of those disputes. We'll start heading back up again. We see that there's here in the lakes around the Øresund, there's ships using the lakes. The lakes are very important in Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden, but the lakes were anything on the water. Lakes and rivers was the way to move heavy cargo, so that was always very important. And getting around was easier in a boat, in spite of all the various hazards. And just as a way to highlight that, here's another little interesting Easter egg. You see this man, and he's leading a horse over the mountains, and they both have these sort of discs on their feet. Well, the snowshoes that we're familiar with, that are basically a net, that was an invention of indigenous people in the Americas. And at this point, the Scandinavians didn't know about that yet, so they were using these sort of flat wooden plates, which you can imagine would be a lot more tricky and uncomfortable. Here we have a depiction of a battle going on between a bunch of deer or elk, maybe, I guess elk and moose are kind of the same thing, but they're fighting with a pack of wolves, which is probably to do with some kind of legend. And then here we can see we're getting closer into the area of the Sami up here in northern Norway, northern sort of overlap between Norway and where Norway overlaps with both Russia and Sweden. And these guys got around on skis. Now, the skis were an indigenous invention in this area, so as long as you're not on a super steep slope, getting around on skis was way, way better than trudging through the snow. And You can see there's some animals here. I think maybe that's supposed to be a lynx. I'm not sure. And as we get a little further, going back further up, we can see that they're saying Finnmarkia and Lapia. So the Laps was the old name that they used for the Sami people. And we can see a couple again of these. Finnmarkia was not Finland. It's a district in Norway, but it's named that way because this was another one of the words that they used for the Sami and also for the Finns, who were a mix of other European people with the Sami, kind of culturally and a little bit probably genetically too. So these folks are on skis, and it's among these people in general in Scandinavia. Women had a lot more rights and freedom than in many other parts of Europe, particularly Southern Europe. But up in this region with the Sami, you're not going to have a lot of distinction necessarily with hunters and warriors between men and women. So here you see a man and a woman both on skis with bows. Probably they're hunting, maybe look like rabbits or something up here in the hills. And as we go a little further, we see a very interesting confrontation going on between forces that are kitted out like cavalry and infantry in the Western style with plate armor and pikes and lances versus a bunch of people riding on reindeer, carrying bows, and also big clumsy looking clubs. And then we have a bunch of people on skis with bows. And I guarantee you these people were tough and dangerous to mess with in their own turf. So it looks like what we're seeing is a bunch of Sami people running off some Swedes here probably, or that's my interpretation. Going a little further south here, this is super interesting to me. We see a bunch of people in special kind of skin tight outfits. These are like leather outfits that would have layers of fur underneath them, and I think like whale blubber or something, or wax, to cover them on the outside to make them waterproof. And they're hunting seals on the ice floes here, which is very, this is an interesting technical detail. And then a little further south, we actually see a part where the sea has frozen over, and there's people crossing the sea on horse-drawn sleighs. So it's like the Jingle Bells song. And then here's another horse-drawn a sleigh that's being drawn by a reindeer. These folks had domesticated the reindeer. Here's a guy. I don't know if that's a lynx, and I don't know if it's his pet or if it's stealing his fish from him that he was trying to cook. Another funny detail. We can see some shipbuilding. And as we get further here into southern parts of Finland, we're starting to get see a lot more indications of war. So here's a cannon that's coastal defense right there. And we go a little further south. Here's I believe this is a Swedish warship here. And he's got the names for the different regions of Sweden. So this is Gothia, and this is Gotland. This is the big island that the city of Visby, which was once a very important Hanseatic city, but kind of got wrecked by the Danes and a bunch of different pirates and so on. And then the mainland of Gothia, which is where we find a lot of the urbanization in Sweden can be found. And a little bit over to the west over here is where the Scania market, which is a big fish market where they were harvesting herring. I think this is probably a representation of some of the fish that were being harvested there. That was sort of the very key to the birth of the Hanseatic League. And then going back down into the mainland, we can see a bunch more of the Hanseatic seas. We see the beacons along the coast, Vismar, Rügen, Greifswald, and then the big one with its own coat of arms is Danzig or Gdansk. And it's interesting, it looks like he's got both names there, I think. I might be reading that wrong. But Danzig was the powerhouse Hanseatic city of the Eastern Baltic, and this was the one that the Swedes were going to be dealing with the most. And they cast, in the 16th century particularly, Danzig cast a long shadow. They were not to be trifled with. They were doing business, and not necessarily in a predatory way, but if they were accosted, let's say, then they were quick to bring trouble, serious trouble. These are the regions, Mecklenburg, Pomerania, leading up to Prussia, which is today Poland. So Danzig is in Poland today, and it's at the mouth of river systems. You can see the Vistula. He shows it going down through the margin of the map. This is a very important trade artery that goes down into central Poland, where and to Ukraine as well, indirectly, which is where was the huge breadbasket, super productive breadbasket of Europe. And then a little bit to the east of that, we have the the remnant of the Teutonic Order is sort of camped out in this area, and they're going through their transformation because they gave up Catholicism too, which gets a little awkward. These are the river boats that would be going down these rivers, and this is already, we're in Lithuania now. So the Lithuanians had converted to Christianity very late. Uh, Technically, some of them had converted as early as the 14th century, but it probably was still very much a process going on. These people were mostly pagan or heathen in the time that this map was created. And this is Vilnius, which is probably the most important city in Lithuania, but it's still a very rural and kind of mysterious place for the Latin folks. And we can see where it's depicting that the sea is frozen. So this is all ice along here. That changes color probably because these are different. These are two different versions of the map that were combined together. And we can see as we go a little further east, just a lot of violence and warfare. And the reason is that this is the borderland between the Latin world here in this region that's called Livonia, which was a colonized zone to northeast of Lithuania, where you had German settlers and Danes and people that had been brought in from all over Europe, who had also been brought into Lithuania, by the way. They've been invited in with tax breaks and stuff so that they could help keep up technologically. And they're fighting with people that are kitted out in a different way, which are the Muscovites. The Moscow was the powerful city-state that had arisen from from being a vassal of the Mongol horde, and they had finally kind of thrown off the right around this time they had thrown off the overlordship of the Mongols of the Golden Horde, and were asserting themselves. But they were very much kind of a cultural fusion between Orthodox Christian Europeans with the Mongol system that they had become part of, and so their fighting style is very much, as we can go see, we go up a little further here into the border. This is Karelia in Finland, where there's a lot of strife going on between the Latin forces. Is going to probably be Swedes up here. A little further south, this would be Germans. It could be still German mercenary, but you see the very great similarity in style. Cannons, armored horsemen, lances, and there would also be infantry with pikes and so forth. And then on the Muscovite side, you see a different looking kit. They've got textile coats on, and I'm going to take a quick look at that. I have some. Oh, hold on a minute. It's a very different type of equipment that is based on largely a hybrid of the Latin techniques and kit and clothing and so forth with the Mongol. And if you bear with me a second here, yeah, here we go. So here's a depiction of some Druzina. That's an early one. I think that's from the 13th century. This is probably 16th century, I think. So you see they've got these like quilted padded coats, and they'll very likely have armor underneath those. They're carrying swords and sabers and bows. You see this guy's got a goritos, this is the steppe nomad way of carrying a bow on a saddle, and lots of arrows. This is a depiction from the Battle of Orsha, which was a battle that took place in the early 16th century, in 1513, between the mostly the Poles with a bunch of other Latinized allies against the Muscovites. And these are what we call Druzina. These are the kind of medium cavalry of the Rus principalities, especially Muscovy. And you can see these guys they've got heavy coats, and then they've got some armor above it, or sometimes the armor's below the coat. But here it looks a lot of them have armor above, which can either be a breastplate, but much more likely would be something called yushman, which is a mix of little metal plates with mail. So it's a little bit more flexible as armor. And they all got these bows and lots of arrows. It's just like what you see when you see depictions of the Tartars or the Mongols. These guys are carrying 40 or 60 arrows each because they're shooting a lot. They can fight close in, maybe with their armor, and they would also often carry lances, so they can fight close in and almost as well as the Western heavy cavalry, but they have a substantial capability of archery. Um, so a very different type of forces, you could say, and that's exactly what we're seeing right here along the border. This is where the troubles come in from for a lot of the Latinized people here. And then a little further down here, we can see this is kind of amusing. This guy looks like he's fighting with a cow on horseback. This is an aurochs. This is, I believe, this was a now extinct type of kind of a buffalo that or a cow. I think of a very like I think it's very similar to a Cape buffalo that were notoriously dangerous and a very popular subject for hunting in the Latin world and probably in Russia as well. Where if you could slay an aurochs, then you have put your name on the board. Yeah, that means you're a pretty tough hombre because those things were dangerous as hell. There's actually references to Viking groups running into aurochs. I believe Ivar the Boneless in one of the sagas killed an aurochs with a bow, and that was considered one of the feats that made him stand out. This is another little interesting detail here. These are not warriors. These guys are also in sort of skin tight suits that were probably have layers of fur underneath and were waterproofed. And what they're doing is ice skating. This is how ice skating was done in the Middle Ages. There's actually a description of this from England in the 12th or 13th century. So they've got bone skates, but unlike our modern skates that are made out of steel, the bone doesn't really bite the ice. It just lets you glide over it. So to get purchase on the ice, they have staves with iron points. So this is actually how people used to ice skate. So this is actually a very accurate depiction of the process. So let's see what else we got. Here's some travelers with crossbows. Now this is what you're going to see on the Latin side. They pretty much focused heavily on using the crossbows. These are very powerful weapons, not the kind of crossbow that you'd have today. These are weapons that might have 500 pounds up to maybe 1,200 or 1,300 pound draw, up to five or 600 kilogram draw, which would be spanned with special devices that are a little bit. The heavy ones would be spanned with something that's like the jack used on a car. This was their preferred counter to the very deadly and efficient recurve bows that the Muscovites were using in this area. And one other thing to add is that the fighting that was going on between the Muscovites and the Latin forces could get very nasty. Now that's not to say that there wasn't also trade and sort of harmonious. There was a lot of trade that went on, but there was a lot of static. And in the 16th century, it got very, very ugly. The Livonian War in particular, which took place here in Livonia, was really incredibly brutal, and it kind of set the stage for the 30 Years' War. There's sort of a sectarian aspect because the Rus people are Orthodox, and the ones the Latin people are Catholic and then Protestant. But it's also kind of it's this sort of Latinized world mixing with the clashing with the steppe nomad world, because that's what the Muscovites were part of at that time still. So that was a look at this beautiful map that I find personally so charming. I like this map so much I have a poster of it on my wall that I made. It really gets us into this world in pretty interesting ways, and we'll delve deeper. We're going to delve a lot deeper once we start looking at the pamphlet, the description of the northern people. So let's talk about that real quick. The Historia de Gentibus Septennia. I shouldn't try to do the Latin. I just call it a description of the northern people. It was first printed in Rome in 1555. This was also from Olaus Magnus, and it is like the map. It's a mixture of folklore, folk wisdom, natural philosophy, history, and mythology. This goes deeper. So the map actually uses a lot of the same images. I believe they're literally the same woodcuts in many cases. If not, they're very close. But we get a little bit more of an explanation, and it ties it into both the science of these people and their understanding of their natural environment of mountains and snow and ice and currents and whirlpools and all that, and also their magic, which was very important for these folks, and especially the magic of their neighbors and the Sami people and the Finns and these mysterious sort of troll people that I'm really interested in. I'm probably going to do a whole nother thing on another video about. A lot of interesting, weird stuff. So we're going to just dive in. Let's just dive in. So, okay. Let's see. Bear with me just a second while I pull this up. I thought I had it queued up, but I did something wrong. And I'll put it where we can see it so you can see what I'm doing. Here we go. Okay. So this first part... these are called rune staves, and I hadn't known about this until I did this project. And I've read the sagas. I will say that from my experience, you may be similar to me in that I thought I knew a lot about Norse mythology and sort of Viking culture, and I've read, I think, every one of the sagas that's been translated into English, and there's a lot here that I did not know about that Olaus brings to us. So these are called runestaff. The woodcut says, the description says it's a father teaching his son and a mother teaching her daughter how to use and read these runestaffs. So these are written in the old runic alphabet, which was still used in this period a little bit, but mostly for public inscriptions and for esoteric purposes. There was a grimoire that was done with runes in the 16th century. So here we have. These are a type of trolls that are in a place called Rochik, and we see a miner working underground mining, and he's using a sledgehammer with a wedge, and you can see ore being hoisted up with hoists. There's a winch up here. Over on the right, we got a rock troll also working. This is a thing that shows up in mining literature, including very serious and technically precise mining literature, like Agricola's wonderful book. In the 16th century, this belief in these underground creatures that lived in the mines was very persistent. I find it quite amusing. Here, this is a depiction of a king called Eric Vaderhat, and he was supposed to be a Swedish king who had a magic hat that could control the wind. So he's actually using his magic hat. You can see the hat with the little spikes on it, and he's summoning the wind to blow a ship toward him. I don't really know much about this legend, but this is what Olaus is not necessarily saying that this is a real thing. He's just showing us a legend from this part of the world. So this is a depiction of the Sami people, or the Lapps, as the Swedes were calling them, in their heavy furs, and it's showing different Lapps of different ages practicing archery. And according to the Swedes, the Lapps were very good archers. So, this is really interesting because it kind of looks like, the German depictions of the wilder Mann. So this is supposed to be about crystals and magnets. So they're showing snow falling, and it says that sound waves from the mountains create magnetic phenomena in the ground. I'm not sure what the barrels are about. It might be some kind of way to detect something going on in the mountain. This is something I would like to find out a little bit more about. I think this is also pack ice on the right, maybe. But the idea of the mountains creating magnetic phenomena, that's fascinating. I really want to dive more into it. But this is an example of these people being natural philosophers and trying to, at the same time that you had people that still believed in the spirits and the trolls and everything, you had people that were trying to penetrate into natural philosophy in this period, including in Sweden, and they were trying to use empiricism and to figure out things like magnetism. And they had a lot of, on the one hand, they're borrowing from the classical world to try to figure out this sort of natural philosophy, the science, but they're also applying their folk wisdom because they know that some of it is real. We'll see more of that as we go on. This is one I couldn't find a translation of the excerpt, but it's something to do with lighting fires and using kindling. So you see this woman she's got like a giant match in her mouth, but it's an interesting depiction of the home front. The man's got a match too. So I don't know if you just walk around in the house with a match sticking out of your mouth, or if they're using it to light some fires. But there's a domestic scene. Looks like I don't know if it's a cat or a dog. I just thought this was an interesting one. So this is talking about different reflections of the sun, halo phenomenon. There's something called sundogs, for example. That these are uh, not, I don't know if you would call it an optical illusion, but they're solar phenomena as far as is observed from the ground level that are particularly common in the northern latitudes. So this is something that they don't look at as if it's the gods or anything at this point, but they understand it. They're trying to explain it, and a lot of these kind of things would happen further south sometimes as well, and they would create basically like UFO panics, which is another thing. There's a famous one from Nuremberg and another one from Basel that happened in the later 16th century that I'm going to do a video on at some point. But to me, this is an interesting example of these people being more familiar with it, and for them, it's a natural phenomenon that they understand the parameters of. And this is a description of some of the details. Here we're going from science back to magic because this is called Invocators of the Sea. So the excerpt says a magician called Haller, also known as Ull, stands on a bone from an animal which sort of looks like a ski. With help of this bone and a stick over his left shoulder, he's able to travel across the seas. The stick seems to produce the winds. On shore, which they think might be Iceland, a knight on a horse and a princess is visible in a window. So I don't know if we had knights in armor like that in Iceland, but that is depicted on these maps. So this is about the flooding of streams. So again, we're going back to science. So we've got two Swedish rivers, the Indalsälven and the Lungen. Please forgive me for my pronunciation. And so these are creeks which, at certain times of the year, as the snow melts, they will flood. And so you see basically there's a giant flood going on, and it's wrecking some houses and a church. This is something very important to know about. This is, again, you can't just say, oh, once in a while the gods, make the river flood and wreck us. You have to know the patterns. So there's a time of the year that you probably want to move your stuff off of the riverbank because it's going to be a problem. And this is one of the first things you really got to understand. These would also be portrayed as gods as a way to tell the story. And say, the river god of this river, the Lungan, gets angry in the spring, and then that's when you need to stay away from the banks. This is the way you'll help explain it to children and so forth. But there is a scientific basis that's extremely important for anybody living on any river, but especially when you're in a place where it's, you have such a cold winter and then a warm summer. And once again, we're right back to magic. So the title of this one is On Magic Utensils in Bothnia. And the excerpt says, this woodcut shows the secret chamber of a wizard in the Swedish province of Norrbotten. The wizard has manufactured a magic snake and a toad of copper at his anvil. This magic work has sent him into a trance. I guess he was worn out. And on the right, his right hand is resting on a skull. Above him stands his wife guarding him, and a dragon can be seen near the window. So this is a weird scene, and I love this wife who's standing there with her sword in one hand. I don't know if that's a wand or a torch or what in her other hand, and she looks fierce as hell. And I don't know, this is obviously based on a legend that I'm not familiar with and I really want to learn more about. So when I do, maybe I'll do a video on that. The Legend of Seven Foreign Brothers. This is just about 7 brothers sleeping in a cave at the foot of a high mountain on the shore of the ocean. And this is a place that's notorious for a cold, unpleasant wind called Circus. Now, to me, this is probably some survivors of a shipwreck who tried to take shelter in a cave and froze to death, and that the locals would go travel in the area and they'd see these 7 frozen guys, and it might be a cave that never really warms up. Anyway, just kind of poignant. So this is supposed to be 3 lesser gods. And again, I'm not familiar with these. Maybe the one on the right is Frey, but what it says is Mitodin, who's the guy with the skull on his head on the left, Rostiophus, and Fro. So Fro might be Frey. So that would be a very important god. It's possible that these are Vanir, whereas the Aesir had become more important. But interesting depiction. So this is called Angrim and his men. So what we see here is armed forces. We see infantry with like pikes or spears and bows on the bottom, and then cavalry with lances in Latin type plate armor. Here we see Angrim with the crown and his men. which to support the Danish king defeated King Dengald of Finnmark and King Egbert of Bjarmland in a hard battle. So these guys on the bottom may be the Sami folks or the Finns, or the whoever's living up in Finland, Finnmark. I'm sorry. Okay, next one. Back to science. On the varying shapes of ice. To the left, a river is tumbling down the mountain. At the top of the river, there are ice floes. There are faces in the river. So I think what this is they're depicting. You can see ice flows on the top here, and they're depicting some of the natural phenomenon of ice. We can also see icicles coming off the gutter of a house over here on the top right. The faces. This is probably part of a legend that was used to explain the phenomenon. This is like a mnemonic device. This is like how you would teach kids. So this is again probably more natural philosophy. This is about the varying shapes of snow. So these are crude depictions of snow crystals right here, and they're talking about the snow and sort of like I don't know the different phenomena of snow. Now I'm sure Swedes know a lot more about snow than I do. And that's something that you got to understand because there's snow that you can cross and there's snow that you can't. And there's snow that's stable and unstable and a million different important traits if you're living with the snow. Attention to old people. This is an interesting one to me as well. An old man wants to get down a steep, snowy mountainside. He's been placed on a bear skin that's being pulled by a horse. And that's either his servant or his son that's pulling the horse. So this is like, today we have wheelchairs and little scooters and things like that, but if you're old and can't get around so good, I guess this is one of the ways to do it. This is another really interesting sort of scientific one. Time measurement with shadows. This is showing how in certain places in the far north, and keep in mind, like there's periods where these people are plunged into total darkness for a month, and a lot of the time you're sort of in a twilight. My wife could never live this far north because she needs the sunlight. And this is a way to tell time based on watching the sun peeking over the mountain peaks. So I think this is a super interesting. So this is what. Here's the next one. This is one we saw on the map up in Iceland. On the violent winds circus. Here we see a rider with a sword who's trying to escape from a strong gale. So again, this is sort of like a Jack London situation, and the wind is blowing. This is a dangerous area where the wind could freeze you to death. And that did happen to people. So I love the idea of just seeing this scenario in a film or something where somebody's like riding and you shouldn't go out. The wind's blowing right now. I got to get to such and such a place. There's some mission critical thing that's got to happen, and this guy's literally he and his horse are running for their life, so as not to freeze to death and be hypothermic from the wind. This is another super cool one because I actually found out through some of my Swedish friends in the HEMA world what this is. So this is described as a snow castle with defenders on the left attacked by other boys that try to intrude through tunnels who are bombarding them with snowballs behind a snow wall. In the middle of the picture, some faces are seen. Boys are bringing forward battering rams and the protection of a storming screen. That's over here. So this was apparently a real thing. They used to organize the kids, the teenage boys, I guess, mainly, probably the girls too, because this is where this is. But the rowdier kids would have these massive organized snowball fights where they would make huge snow forts and they would use siege tactics. And this is a way very common throughout the Middle Ages. This is how you learn to fight. You play games. You play rowdy, warlike games, and then that helps you learn the ways of war. And plus, for a kid, this is just pure fun. Yeah, sure, you might break your nose. You might have a bunch of different injuries and stuff, but it's just absolutely a blast. And I wish I could have done that growing up. Hopefully, I wouldn't get frostbite or something. This is a weird kind of evocative one. I believe these are also on the map, although it's not the same woodcut. On statues in the snowy mountains. We see the pilgrim route between Nidaros, which is the old name for Trondheim in Norway, and Jämtland in Sweden. So there's a church, probably a saint's relic up in this place, Jämtland in Sweden. And along the route, pious Norwegian kings, so regional warlords really, have raised these giant statues. So imagine how weird that would be. Like when the Vikings converted to Christianity, we think of Vikings as being pagan, but there were a lot of Christian Vikings. Particularly the kings, because monarchy went well with Christianity. So, and you had these burly, tough Viking Christian kings that are portraying their Christian piety in a rather odd and I would say kind of even maybe a little creepy manner with these giant statues that are up along the cold, quiet pilgrimage route through the mountains. Um, okay, this is an army of a Sami king. It says this is the army of Tengild, the king of Finnmark. In the wintry landscape, we see men riding reindeer by foot or skiing. They're going into battle with Arngrim, allied with the king of Denmark and his men. So, one important point of history in this era is that Denmark controlled Sweden because they sort of married into a joint. There was a famous queen who unified all of Scandinavia, and the Swedes and I guess these people in Finnmark, the Sami and so forth, were fighting against the Danish rule for a really long time and eventually threw them off. Uh, and I think this is the same battle that we saw on the map, where you see a bunch of guys in these heavy textile coats, probably fur coats, riding reindeer on skis with the bows. This is a really neat one. Geats' superstitious notions of thunder. So we see Geats with crossbows and bows. These are supposed to be some of the Viking people, but they're equipped more like medieval Latinized folks with swords and messers and crossbows. But they're shooting at the sky, trying to influence the thunder. One thing I wanted to mention is that in the scientific type people, like Olaus, at this time, and really actually all the way up until the 18th century, they believed that little Neolithic stone axes and stone blades that you would find in the ground, they thought those were called something called thunderstones. They thought they were created by thunder strikes. There's a lot of mystery around thunder, but this idea that they're sort of attacking the clouds with their weapons, I don't know if it's real. It's a legend, clearly, but I find it very evocative and interesting. This is supposed to be a heathen temple which has golden roof and golden chains around it, and then this person that looks sort of unhappy that's in the water is being sacrificed through drowning. This is called the glorious temple of the heathen gods. This is supposed to be the old temple at Uppsala, which was devoted to the gods of the Aesir cult. He says that it shimmers with golden luster, and the golden roof from the golden roof hangs a golden chain which is winding around all the buildings, and the right is a person who's going to be drowned as a sacrifice. So pretty grim. How much they actually did that, it's hard to say. Here's another really cool one. These are supposed to be the Geats, which is one of the Scandinavian tribes, and they're angry at the gods because they didn't do well in battle. So they're threatening the gods and shooting slings at them, apparently, because the gods did not give them enough support in battle. Now, this is a kind of relationship between the people and the gods that I find super interesting in its mythology, and it could be garbled or misunderstood, in the 16th century from whatever it represented in an earlier period when this was actually going on. But this opens up a really interesting kind of concept to me. This one's called On Journeys into the Darkness, and I'm thinking about hiring an artist to make me a modern version of this, sort of a more less cartoonish version of this woodcut. But this represents, as I said, for about a month out of the year, this far up north, you're in total darkness, and for good bit longer than that, you're in sort of semi-darkness. So imagine if you have to go on a long trip when it's pitch black out, just for days and days, weeks on end. So the way is being lit by fireflies, and this guy's on the trail, and he's got his crossbow and a that looks a lot like a shepherd's axe, like you'd see down in a region around Bohemia and southern Poland or something. Might be what it is, or it might just be a regular, Scando axe. But yeah, very, very, to me, a very evocative scene of just like heading down the road with the way lit by the fireflies on your way to some mysterious errand. This is showing horse racing on ice, which I imagine is a very interesting and extremely dangerous pastime. It's dangerous enough to fall off of a horse. Falling off of a horse on the ice when the horse is a lot more likely, I would think, to crash has got to be super recklessly dangerous. This is something to do with a memorial stones, which would probably be rune stones for two brothers. These brothers were prophesized that one of them was going to kill the other, or they were going to kill each other, and so they tried to keep them away from each other for their protection. We're seeing animals fighting here in the background too. So these are some old rune stones that tell the legend about these two brothers that they tried to prevent them from killing each other, but it didn't work. Now here's another one. So there's a series of these that have to do with what are called the Huldra people, which are like troll people that live in the forests. So it says, on combat with sirens of the wood. To left, the king Gorm and Broder and Book, who have traveled so far north that no daylight could be seen. At this place, they get attacked by supernatural creatures on the right. So these are the Huldra, and a lot of them are depicted as female. You could think of them a little bit like dryads or something. I'm going to definitely do a video about the Huldra, but they do show up in the sagas sometimes as well. And I'm not sure if this is just pure fiction of like people, being in the woods a long time and thinking they see Bigfoot, or this is like their version of that, or if it actually represents like an earlier population that was still there, kind of like with the Sami being another population that has different habits and mores and lifestyle. But they show up a lot, and I find them really compelling and interesting, especially from in terms of coming up with fiction and RPG. I'm a game designer as well. I do RPGs. Okay, so hunting tours of the Lap. So these are Sami people. Once again, you see a man and a woman. I believe this is the same pair that we saw on the map, although it's a different woodcut. But they're on skis hunting, and a hunting tour. This is just describing the nomadic lifestyle where they would travel around from region to region, different good hunting zones. You can see they've got a dog there. Uh, so this is called On Lodgings on the Ice. So these huts have been built, or cabins have been built on the ice, and this is like a little, I think it's a laurel wreath that is showing that this is open for travelers. This is very helpful if they could set up a place you could stop, and you can see here's a sleigh being pulled on horseback. So a place to get out of the cold and warm up and have some food. Infrastructure for travelers. Okay, so on woman skilled in magic. The witch to the right develops a terrible storm by emptying her pot with a magic potion into the sea. A ship is wrecked in a storm. A man is holding her magic pole with a horse head on top. The moon is darkened by her magic force. So this is a woman that you do not want to mess with. She's got a potion that can cause storms. She's made it dark in the sky. And this pole with the horse's head on it, that reminds me of the knitting pole, which is, among other places, mentioned in Egil Saga. He creates one of those as a threat to the allegedly a wizard or witch queen of Norway who he was feuding with at the time. And the reality of the knitting pole may be just as a way to create shame and an insult that would be public damage to public reputation. As for what all the rest of it means, who knows? But it's a great sort of a story hook. On rocky caves as treacherous haunts. So this is near Lake Vanern, and to the left is Trollhatten, which has massive waterfalls that are very noisy. There's a church in the background with one tower that's supposed to be the town of Lidköping, while the other church with two towers is on the bottom right is supposed to be the cathedral at Skara. So these people are traveling across the land, and you can see it's probably maybe some merchants or just some people that are traveling, and they've got a guard with a spear, but behind them coming out of the cave are bandits. So, watch out for the robbers on the road. Always a big problem all over the world and all over medieval Europe for sure. Okay, on the strange properties of some mountains. So this is the three volcanoes in Iceland. Hekla, Kreuzberg, I'm not sure, and then Helgafjell. This is maybe not what they're called today, I don't know, but this is what it says here. And then I don't know what chaos means, but I love it. And you can see this guy that's walking up to the volcano. That might be, and these little vats right here. I think this is harvesting and processing sulfur, because this is on Iceland, and that is a huge export for Iceland, very important export. They needed to have a good export, that was in demand because they needed a lot of things from trade. On the fairies and the maids in the wood. So this is another really interesting example of our Huldra. King Hoder is visiting a cave where maids of the woods are living. They are powerful, and he wants their support. Two of the maids are crowned. So this could just be a population like the Sami or some other people that live a different way. But again, a lot of these people are depicted as female, which just might mean that it's a more a little bit more female equality in the society, or a little maybe even female dominant. This is what the Greeks portrayed the Amazons. It's now believed that this was a depiction of the Sarmatians or the Scythians who they were running into, among whom there was a lot more gender equality. So it might just be something like that, or it could just be a great fairy tale when you're sitting in your hiding out in your house for the month of darkness, and you telling a lot of stories, which is what these folks did. Um, on whirlpools and the remarkable nature of ice. So this is another. We have some really major whirlpools along the coast of Denmark. We're seeing pack ice, and again, I'm not sure what the barrel is, what the point of the barrel is. Um, on the Fettered Wizard on the island of Visingo. So this is an island in the Lake Vatern in Switzerland, and this is a wizard named Gilbert who's been fettered with two rune staffs. And on the road on the left, you can see some people that are with torches that are looking for the cave where he's being fettered. Now, my advice is do not unfetter this guy. If he's been fettered with the rune staffs, remember the rune staffs was the first plate on this. I say leave him be, man, because it could be a lot of trouble. I don't know if you ever saw Lords of Illusion, where the scary wizard guy was revived. And it didn't work. It didn't turn out well. Um, Here's some more magic. Wizards and magicians among the Finns. A scene in Finland where the inhabitants had magic forces. The specialty was to sell suitable winds to merchant sailors. The man on the right sells a rope with 3 knots to the captain of a ship. If you loose 1 knot, you get mild winds, 2 knots gives stronger winds, and 3 hard storms. The crew of the sinking ship in the background, that's the guy at top left there, have not believed in this magic and loosed the 3rd knot. So this is either just a fantastic scam that the Finns came up with to sell to Swedish and German and Polish and whatever sailors. It's not magic. This is something I actually put into my RPG book on historical magic a little bit, but I'd like to get into it more. These are the dwarfs that I mentioned that are supposed to be on Greenland. Dwarves and giants may just be people that are a little shorter, people that are a little taller. This could be Inuit, maybe, possibly. Or it could be just a Scandinavian legend that got pushed over into Greenland when, society had become Christianized and everything. So they wanted to make the legend be something going on farther away. This is the cool depiction, though. These are supposed to be the dwarves fighting cranes. They're having wars with cranes, which is, a predatory little, like a fishing bird. So super interesting. The dwarves are one of them is riding a goat. I mean, this looks like something from The Hobbit almost. This is Defense of the Oppressed. So this is supposed to be a hero called Starkather, who helped the Norwegian king Helge to fight against 9 unjust fighters. I love it. This is probably like a Seven Samurai type situation. This odd-looking image is sword dance, which is very much contemporaneous with the culture in the 16th century. Sword dance is closely linked to the fencing tradition of the Kunstfechtens down in the continent. In fact, with some of these musicians we see on the left looked a little bit like Landsknechts. We also see people doing the hoop dance, which is kind of like a hula hoop thing. This will be going on a lot of times during Carnival, or maybe in Sweden they might do it during Midsummer or something. But this is a festival where the guys come out with their swords. They do kind of a strange dance. They'll often put people up in a platform that they make by joining all their swords together, and they would fight on there. But this is interesting because it depicts, I'm a HEMA guy, so this is showing us the connection to the fencing tradition. Here's a bunch of weapons. These are infantry weapons, and they're largely the kind of weapons that we would see adapted for use for peasants. We see a variety. This looks like the kind of Viking halberd, the famous Viking halberd weapon. And then we have actual halberds and giant. This is like a bardiche type axe. This is similar to the Czech type flail articulated club. This is a Morgenstern. So these are all like weapons that the Swedish peasants probably used in battle. The Swedish peasants were very tough in battle. And then we have a sword, and this is probably a messer here. This might be a little degen, like a thrusting sword. But all these would be carried quite often by peasants who proved quite formidable in battle and helped liberate Sweden. I'm going to do a shout out to Dalarna. That was one of the places where they had the uprising. Trading goods on the ice. So this is kind of like you see in North America when you have groups of people from different cultures, like the Europeans, the French, for example, trading with the Indian Native American people, tribes, the Iroquois Confederation folks and all that. They would put goods on the bank of a river, and then they would come back and see what somebody else left, and eventually they were trading along the bank, in person, and once they got to trust each other a little better. So here's something similar. The guy's putting down crossbows and tools and his little barrels of stuff, and probably coming from different culture. This could be Muscovites on one side and Swedes on the other, or Sami on one side and Norwegians on the other, whatever. And this is just a scene of a tavern or a wine shop. Here's this guy's, he's tapping the wine barrel and drinking, and people sitting around the table. This is very, very similar. The inside of one of those, maybe one of those inns on the ice, very similar to what we would see all over Latin Europe at this time. And then here we have these trolls being put to work. So this is similar to the one that was in the map, the red guy sweeping the stable. But we also see one here that's doing maybe some mining work, and then here's one that's rowing a boat, and he seems to also be controlling some wind. So that could be a very useful pal. And the word I see associated with this is tomtar, and that's the I've already done this one. That's the whirlpool. Okay, so there you go. There's a book of the description of the Norman people, the description of the northern people by Olaus Magnus, and I hope you enjoy this little plunge. To me, these primary sources are a time tunnel. This takes us right into that world, albeit with my not fantastic level of understanding of all the things that are in this, but it does give us some direct insight into what's going on in the minds of the people at the time and what their world looks like, and what's all going on. And for me, these kinds of sources are a treasure. If you want to become famous, if I being an archbishop would be great, but nobody really remembers all the other archbishops so much. But if you want to be famous in the future, make a beautiful map, make a beautiful artwork, make an atlas, make wonderful literary sources for future historians, and they'll love you. Because I don't know a lot about Olaus Magnus. He could have been a terrible person, but I get the sense that he was a great guy, and I love this guy because I love what he produced. That gives me this insight and access into this world that he was living in. So I hope you liked it, and I'll be doing a few more videos in the near future. So I hope to see you soon. I'm going to have links in the notes to translations of the description of the Northern Peoples and the wiki about Olaus, and a direct link to this map that you're looking at. And by all means, man, print it out and put it on your wall, and you can look at it and just take a time journey all the way into this other place, because I think it's worth it. Anyway, my name is John Chandler, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you again pretty soon.